Okay, so we're having a chat today about some predictions for 2021. I guess that's a vaguely dangerous thing to do, as you know, with the current climate, but we will persevere anyway. And if we can start maybe with one of the major buzz topics, which is sustainability, and maybe within that, the renewable energy part of it is, clearly it's not a new thing, but there's maybe a new impetus to look at it and what is, practical moving forward. Any thoughts on that?
I'd start by saying, in the first part of the view around sustainability, and if there are a number of facilities that are legacy type facilities in a data center world that are probably now coming up to their sort of 20-year anniversary. And whilst there's a lot of focus on energy and sustainability in new build, there's this massive investment in legacy infrastructure and real estate and technology that is coming to an age where it has to be repurposed and reprovisioned. And I think as that's happening, there's a real need, and I think that's happening to focus on measures and how you can take the legacy investment in infrastructure and real estate to bring that forward for more forward-thinking ideas and approaches. So I think talking about renewables is one thing, but on new build and so on. But I really think, certainly in 2021, this focus on existing infrastructure and legacy infrastructure, and where we're reprovisioning and propositioning that for the next cycle of IT and technology needs a real focus as well and shouldn't be lost.
Okay, in terms of the specifics on, you say obviously there's a lot of legacy kit. There's, clearly what energy gets pumped into a building, whether it's a new build or a legacy, it can cope with it. But do you think these legacy, I suppose in an ideal world, would these legacy facilities be mothballed and you just build nice, brand new, incredibly energy efficient, sustainable facilities? The reality obviously is we've got this huge estate, as you say, but I guess how do you characterize that attempt to bring them up to speed as opposed to new build?
Well, I think it's. Sorry, go on. Sorry, Jim.
Just to interject there, we're already seeing some of the major clients, colo and wholesale developers, starting to decommission some of their older stock and moving and migrating their customers into newer facilities that have lower PUEs, more efficient buildings, etc. So you're starting to see that. You're starting to see that move going forward. The other issue as well is not just in terms of building brighter and shinier, it's the technologies that go into that. So what we build around that in terms of sustainability at the moment is very much fossil fuel based. So you look at standby generators and things of that nature. Whereas you look at the growing trends coming from the hyperscalers, for instance, looking at lithium batteries, hydrogen cell batteries, these kind of technologies which are very clean to provide that resilience in these newer type facilities. So I think you're going to see that grow as these become more readily available. Currently they're quite prohibitive in terms of cost and actually in terms of the skill sets to actually maintain and operate them are also fairly in short resource at the moment. So it's those things to build on. But I do think that this will be pushed through and start coming through at a more rapid pace, simply because of the social pressures that are being brought to bear against the larger corporations.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. And to answer your question, Phil, just going back, I think on the legacy infrastructure and data centers, if you look at the inbuilt levels of energy efficiency of 20 years ago in engineering infrastructure, particularly, where that equipment's coming to the end of its useful life, the technology used now is more advanced. Jim's talked to some even more advanced technologies, which, whilst they're still expensive, could be adopted. But clearly we're just in a different place, and the ability to take what is a large portfolio, if you're a very big client, of data center or technology real estate that's actually operating at sort of 15, 20 year ago type levels of energy efficiency, and actually in one big move to be able to take that to more concurrent levels of energy efficiency would be a saving in itself. We use this metric of sort of PUEs or whatever. I mean, I think it's fair to say to you that most facilities were probably at that time operating around maybe high ones into the twos easily. And most facilities that are built now might be a 1.1. So they're just some step changes that will just could and can occur just by where we are now, 20 years, 15 years on.
Okay, and Jim, you referenced lithium-ion batteries. I know that's one of the things people are talking a lot about at the minute. I don't want to exaggerate, because there've been sort of scare stories, obviously, about some sort of fire-related issues, which I'd be interested in your views on that. I mean, the other thing is, well, obviously, there's a finite amount of lithium in the ground. So although I understand the focus on it, it's dare I say, it's no more renewable than, to a certain extent, the fossil fuel idea. So any thoughts, I guess, as to that sort of lithium-ion play at the moment?
It's in its infancy, and you're quite correct in terms of the risks around that, and the sustainability factor in terms of long term. But what I think it is engendering is a different thinking, and that's where we're moving towards in terms of how we come up with solutions. Now, hydrogen cells 20 years ago had a reputation for combustibility and control around those, and now they're being talked of as being completely safe, and the future going forward. You look at the things that are now being put into cars, for example. So it's trying to get to that place where we can mass produce something that is safe and sustainable. And coming back to Steve's point, there's going to be a number of step changes, because the driver to actually get these things in place is increasing pace and increasing change. So therefore, I think you're going to see a lot more investment in terms of those alternative technologies. And it may not be lithium batteries going forward in the longer term, but certainly as a step change, I think that's something that will be looked at. Personally, I think hydrogen cells are probably the longer term with what we have now, and what we have in place now. But nevertheless, I think there is this sea change in opinion, the sea change in pressure on companies to look at those different solutions and come up with something that really is truly renewable and sustainable.
Okay, and just one other angle on this one before we move on. Waste heat reuse, or I guess district heating systems, are related. I mean, how, again, I know there are a lot of factors where your data center is, if it's in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of a big city, etc. But I mean, as a sort of theoretically, is there a lot of opportunity to use all that heat that a data center generates while the compute's doing its stuff to reuse that somewhere else and to address that sort of sustainability issue? Or is it, as I say, because of where data centers are and the practicalities of repurposing the heat, it's maybe not as big an opportunity as some making out? Any thoughts on that?
I think this is an approach that's far more common, particularly in Europe. I think, from my perspective, what we've suffered from in the UK is a more holistic approach to the overall planning infrastructure, where too many things from a planning and local authority perspective are seen as individual entities, and the ability to properly master plan infrastructure around a a holistic solution for a community or an area is one, again, that we haven't really addressed in it, particularly in this country. And I think absolutely it's linked to this, issue of renewables, energy efficiency, sustainability, that a much more hung together approach across a number of agencies to make that happen. Because it is a common approach, certainly, that's used in Europe. But we failed probably from the fact that we have a planning system that's far from perfect, with a lot of individual interests that are never really brought together for the wider good.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into a political debate there, but maybe we'll save that for another date as to what's going on there. But I mean, although related to what you just said, obviously smart cities are, were being touted as the future. Whether the pandemic has sort of, put a slight sort of downer on that in terms of the rate of progress. And I guess, data centers are an important part of that smart city sort of overview, but the edge as well, and everyone's talking about 5G. You can't move without 5G. As to whether it's actually here now and being used, or and where it's being used is interesting. But I guess any thoughts as to what you're seeing there? Because everyone's talking about edge and 5G. I think the reality with 5G is maybe it's only being used inside sort of buildings and on individual campuses. But at some stage, presumably, edge data centers and 5G will get rolled out right across certainly urban environments to start with. What are you seeing at the moment in terms of that journey or not?
I think in terms of where we are on that journey, we're just at the beginning of it. I think you have to look at the overarching trend, and that is that data is growing exponentially. And you see that in the rise of big data, in analytics, the edge and cloud computing, IoT and 5G, as you've mentioned. These will all grow alongside it. And these will all facilitate in terms of how we use that data and how that data is processed. I mean, digitalisation is happening in all industries and in all business workloads, and that's only been magnified from what we've seen over the last 9 months. Now, the interesting question in terms of this smart cities and the urbanisation is that, the current statistics are that globally there's something like 3 million people a week moving into cities. And the prediction is by, I think, kind of mid up to 2050, there's going to be around 70% of populations living in cities. So therefore, these solutions are going to have to come in. And really to maximise the impact of 5G and what that will create, the edge is that solution. And the predictions are that in the next 8 years, that the edge data centers will outgrow traditional type data centers by a factor of 4. So I think from that point of view, you're absolutely going to see the edge breaking. And again, predictions are that edge is going to have 10 times the impact that cloud has had over the past 5 years. So it's going to be absolutely massive. But in order to really, really take advantage of it and to make sure we're prepared for it, it comes back to Steve's point around the infrastructure, around joined up thinking, and around that future thought that's going to enable it. Because what you're going to be looking at is some kind of pod facility or container facility dropped into the urban areas and eventually into more rural areas to give them coverage as well. But you need the infrastructure to go along with that. Now, on the back of that, obviously, edge takes a load of power. And on the back of that, you've got the new government missive that by 2030, all new cars are going to be electric. So again, there's that infrastructure that's got to go in as well. Those points are going to need to be monitored, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this massive drive to get these things in place, but there's no actually collective and joined up thinking about how that infrastructure is going to be put in place to enable this.
I'm sorry, to interject there. I think that's something I'd have raised with you before. It's you have a target to hit this by be carbon neutral, but all the time while you're working towards that, the load is growing. So it's a bit like you're chasing this thing that keeps running over the horizon. So let's say we're going to be carbon neutral. If we stood still, that's one thing. But the fact that that keeps disappearing over the horizon because of all the things that Jim has said, be it edge, car charging, it's all got to be powered. And it's, where does the horizon finally come on the carbon neutral point?
And the other thing, I think we may have just touched on it previously, but who's going to build out and own this edge? Because there's various people. Are the colos going to build a load of edge facilities and just hope people are going to come along and take some space? Are the telcos, who maybe aren't as cash rich as we all perhaps think they are they going to build out an infrastructure? Are the hyperscalers, is Google and Amazon going to say, well, we can see how this is going to benefit our huge great empires, so we'll build it out? Any thoughts as to sort of, as you say, to your point? I know it needs joined up thinking, but at some point somebody's got to put their hand in their pockets and start bankrolling it.
I think all of the above, all that you mentioned there. I think you will see a drive in terms of telecoms joining up perhaps with data center providers in order that they get their networks out there. I think also if you see the drive in kind of the Netflixes, the Amazons, the retail shopping, that kind of lends itself to those kind of partnerships. And the hyperscalers, absolutely. They will be in some form, shape or another developing solutions, whether that's through their own rollouts or there's that partnership with colo and wholesale providers as they are doing now. At the moment it's all open, but then you do have specialist providers. You have Edge Connect, for example, that are absolutely focusing on edge computing. So I think you're going to see a number of drivers, and it's probably a bit like we had in the early 2000s, in that there will be a bit of a rush and then there'll be a settlement in terms of what that delivery model looks like. But what we'll move towards is coming away from single projects to more of a program rollout. So there'll be a more structured approach in terms of how these things are developed, how they are constructed, how they are eventually deployed. So I think you'll see the current supply chain changing in order that they can accept and operate within those programs rather than becoming a project by project based setup. So I think that's going to drive a lot of change in terms of the way we go about delivering data centers and the way we look at delivering data centers.
And I think you see already some consolidation in that market where recently there's been some of the mast operators have been acquired by a couple of bigger technology companies. So on that path, there may be that consolidation starts to occur where people start to aggregate the various elements, of this. But equally, you can't avoid what we've just talking about in terms of some of the things that you need to associate with this. One is land, and two is power or a power source. And there are a couple of things that there is an increasing scarcity of. Again, without politicizing it, is you have to start looking at those in a wider context. But there's no doubt about we needed 5G and then whatever variants come beyond that to drive and to get maximum use of some of the pieces of technology we've got in Internet of Things, and to have 5G to be able to utilize that and create that growth in IoT. You need edge because we need to process that data at the edge of the network. But the interesting things, in the final bit that takes you on to is, and Jim touched on this, is as you start to locate these, and particularly in geographically diverse areas, you need to get power to geographically very diverse areas. But because you can't get people there, these are elements that will need maintaining. And then that takes you on to the people element of this. Whilst we talk about the technology, there's this people element, because eventually there is something that needs to be maintained there, or something that has to happen with the IT or the hardware there, which then takes you into how are we going to address that for the future? And then clearly, as you said, dangerous prediction, but how we start to utilize machine learning and AI to be able to operate these edge facilities that are in very geographically diverse and remote areas potentially. And
okay, yeah,
will
we
see that? Will we see, an increased use of, people talk about the AI, they're really probably talking about machine learning still in its context.
More automation, more than anything else.
Yeah, how does that grow? Do we see the pace of that increasing through next year and beyond?
Okay, I mean, I think we'll revisit that a bit later, but I just on the build out. I mean, I'm thinking rightly or wrongly. I mean, investment wise, offices seem to have taken a bit of a drubbing during the pandemic in terms of, a lot of people not renewing contracts for large buildings in cities, etc. I mean, are you seeing at all the fact that the investors, who would traditionally buy up office space and rent out all that, are any of those beginning to have a look at, say, at the data center market as an alternative place where they can, get some good returns, or is that for the future, or is it still up in the air as to how much commercial property is going to shrink in terms of whether we're all going to work from home more often? Any thoughts, or are you seeing anything at the moment?
I think in terms of probably the past 5 years, we've seen the rise in technical funds which have invested directly in the technology sector and data centers in particular. I think that's a very interesting question in terms of will we see an influx of commercial investors into the data center market? What we have seen is some tentative steps taken by investors in order to sound out what the market is, but what you're moving from is a building that's there that will last 25, 30, 40, 50 years and is very much a long-term investment into an investment into an arena whereby change is everything. And that is only accelerating. And whilst it's very exciting and can give good yields and good returns, unless you understand that sector and have a base in that sector, it can be a very risky investment. So I do think you'll see a migration of capital coming across from the traditional investors into the technology sectors, and we have seen some investors come through with some really interesting schemes. And when I say interesting, it's you look at it and you think it's just never ever going to work, and it's simply because they've read the background, the possible yields, the possible returns, and just think, what, we can convert a multi-story office block into a data center, which you can't. So I think there'll be a period of education, there'll be a period of assimilation, but I do think that there will be more investors coming into the data center market, certainly over the next 2 to 3 years.
You're probably seeing at the moment more institutional type money coming rather than developers, previous office developers and so on come in. You see more sort of pension and institutional money coming into the market at the moment. But it's interesting, the more mainstream commercial property developers seem to have moved their focus to a lot of residential and logistics solutions, unsurprisingly, from a lot of the big old traditional property companies. But I think there's certainly quite a lot of institutional money kicking around, and in infrastructure funds as well, which is the other one, which in looking at data centers and technology as a form of infrastructure, and investing through those types of funds as well.
Okay, and which may or may not lead us neatly on to the B word. We have to bring that in, I guess. Brexit. So, that clearly investment side. Obviously, the city still. I don't think any of us quite know, what's required or not on the 1st of January. But leave it. I guess Brexit. You can look at it two ways. I guess, as it divided the nation. I mean, there are clearly opportunities, I guess, when we have our independence for the government to incentivize certain industry sectors, and maybe digital and the data center one is one of those. And I guess on the downside, whether it's, and again, the pandemic highlighted it, but Brexit might exaggerate the issues. There's the whole supply chain thing. If you're sourcing a lot of your facilities infrastructure, components from mainland Europe or whatever, whether that's going to happen. So I guess, are you, either of you, are you glass half full or half empty when it comes to how the data center industry will find itself in the new year and beyond?
I think generally half full. And I think you have to take that view because there is no doubt there is opportunity out there. And if you look at the wider aspects of it, actually data doesn't have any boundaries. It doesn't have borders. It goes wherever it goes. And I think one of the things the UK has got is world-leading specialist expertise around data centres and their development and deployment. And I think that will continue despite Brexit. The trading conditions may change, no doubt will change, and we'll have to overcome those challenges and difficulties as they appear. I think in terms of where the government will go next, I think undoubtedly there'll be some form of tax incentives to build in Britain. The stated aim is that we become a technology hub. We are generally a service-based economy. To have that service-based economy, you need the engineering behind that, which is that digital infrastructure. So I think that will continue. I think more of a concern is the movement of people. For example, we've just opened up in Germany in the last 6 months. We have a lot of projects in Germany. Germany are now talking about introducing a visa system come April. What will the impact on that be? Not only in our staff going out there, but staff coming back here, and that movement that we've taken for granted over the last kind of 50 years. And that I think is a real challenge for everyone, because if we look at the industry as a whole, we're suffering a skills shortage, and we could be in a position where we're narrowing our pool dramatically and increasing the competition that we have to fight against to get our people massively if we're not very careful and think about it again holistically and what we want in the long term. But generally, I think whether I agree with it or not, Brexit will present opportunities, and I think it's for us as a sector to lead those opportunities and absolutely crystallise them and take advantage of those opportunities.
Okay. Any extra thoughts on that, Stephen, or are you?
No, I agree with Jim in terms of I'm a half full type of guy around this as well. I mean, it's a global industry. Jim said the trading conditions may change, but we are a global industry. And if there is a drive to be able to create a better or a stronger, greener manufacturing type industry in the UK on the back of this, and government's move to a greener economy, then that's fantastic. And yes, I think in the technology market, it's a very, very highly mobile workforce, and certainly due to the expertise of people in the UK, and primarily because certainly in data centres we've been at the very leading edge of development in terms of the evolution of data centres. You'll find UK all over the world working on data centre projects, and certainly right across Europe, working, advising and leading on data centre projects. So I think, and I agree with Jim, the focus around people and how that's dealt with, because there is a shortage. There's a shortage in the UK, there's a shortage in Europe of STEM graduates, and all the things we just spoke about for the last sort of 40 minutes about how things are growing. That needs skilled individuals and people. And that's not just IT and technology. If we talk about the things like manufacturing, green energy, renewable, it's all buoyed by graduates in science, technology, engineering, and there aren't enough of them. And less mobile we make that workforce and the people, the more difficult it will be for us, I think.
Okay, yeah, I mean, before this, I mean, you know, skills, as you say, has been an issue for a while, and people talk about it. I guess it's a bit like the environment. Maybe, you know, people talk about it, and everyone says, "Oh, yeah, it's a problem," but you know, they kind of kick the can down the road and assume we'll come up with a solution at some point. I mean, with the skills, how, I guess, you know, bad is it? I mean, I suppose without being facetious, I mean, you know, the government was pointing out that, you know, if you lost your job in a certain sector, you might be able to retrain. Is there a genuine likelihood that there are people out there that can, you know, come across to the data center sector from somewhere else easily? And you know, whether or not that's the case, overall, you know, is the skills shortage, you know, is it a crisis? Would you define it? Or at the moment, it's something to be concerned about, but if the right things are put in place, then, you know, we don't need to panic just yet.
I think so taking those points one by one, if we go back to the fact that, or the statement just made around about taking people from other industries that possibly lost their jobs and retraining them, that's an absolute possibility. The challenge with that is expectation, because they'll have had a certain salary expectation in what they were doing. Coming to us, they will be a trainee, and therefore there's an expectation around in terms of salary levels around that. But if that can be overcome, then absolutely that's an avenue. And I think going back, coming on to the other point you raised in terms of, is it a crisis? I think it's getting that way without a shadow of a doubt. It's moving to that, and unless we do something fundamentally different in approach and how we bring people on board, then yes, it will be a crisis. We've talked about how this industry is growing, how the sector is growing, how data is growing, and how the process behind that needs to cope with that. All you can see is growth. So we have to start engaging with people, making the sector more attractive, because actually I believe that this sector can give you so many career challenges that there's nowhere else that you need to go. I mean, if you want to travel, you can travel. If you want technological change, we've got technological change. If you want to be a process person, then that's there for you as well. So there's all aspects that can be covered, and you can move in between. And this expertise is only going to be needed. It's never going to go away. It might change, it might evolve, but it's always going to be needed. We are now down this path, and it's been really interesting in that Steve and I gave a talk a few weeks ago in terms of how we started the industry and how it's evolved. Now, we've been part of this industry for probably 30 years, maybe a bit more. I'm not going to admit to it, but
you just have.
Yeah, I know.
You have to cut that one, Bill. Cut that.
Well, I mean, the first 25 years of that industry, the change was glacial. The last 5 years, that rate of pace of change has just accelerated. And what you see coming down the track at us, I think that acceleration is only going to increase. So therefore, it's a really exciting place to be, but we just don't advertise it enough. And you know, you go back to 2008 and that missing generation. You look at the potential impact of COVID and perhaps the impacts going forward there. Then yes, we could well be in a crisis unless we start taking steps now in order to address that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a roundtable the other week, and I suggested, you know, you see the IT companies advertise on the telly and telling you know it's got Intel inside, or you know, Amazon tell you all the great things they do. I mean, do you think the data center industry, you know, and again, one of the panelists actually made the point that, you know, we have to be grateful to the health workers during the pandemic, but the other people is the digital industry, and obviously if you like, the foundation of that is data. If we didn't have any data centers, then obviously we wouldn't be talking today. But every aspect of industry would have been absolutely, wiped out during the pandemic, because of it. So, do you think the industry somehow needs to promote itself with or without, sort of government support and funding to as you make those points.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, because it's the fact of what we're doing now. If you said you've got a group of 1,000 people together from different industries and said in the last 8 months, all of this that you've been doing, where do you think that all resides and how it all works? And I think there's a complete, lack of knowledge that somewhere behind the fact that we can have a Zoom call, a Microsoft Teams call, is a ton of infrastructure, software, connectivity through cables that makes all this happen. So I still believe there is a lack of awareness. You rarely see any data center engineers, appear on the TV, do you? Telling everyone about what a great place it is to be and what it does. And we always ask the question when we do our university round tables and stuff, when we're looking for new apprentices, you just hold a phone up and you go, how do you think that works? And the bulk of the people actually believe the data center or whatever makes it work just all sits in the back of the phone. And there's not this. So there's absolutely that awareness, and there are some great things that are happening around it, and like Tech UK do some great work in trying to promote that as an industry across all technologies. Some of the bodies like iMasons and so on are doing work around that as a group of senior industry figures. But I always say we can wait for the government to do something about it, but we might be waiting a very long time. The real key is for us to do it. And, we always, Jim and I have this term, about being ambassadors for the industry, to tell people about what we do, to tell people what a great career it can be, because it is and it can be. And also for our businesses, I've been also selfish about it. We have to do that because we have to find the right people for our business. We have to grow our business. And we have to support our customers. We can't sit back and wait for the government to do that for us. We have to do it. We have to raise awareness. We have to be ambassadors. We get around to universities. We get around to schools. We do whatever we can to raise awareness. But yeah, to your original question, clearly there's a lack of awareness. Most people, it happens, doesn't it? And to most people, it just happens. And there's some magic behind the scenes that makes it happen.
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, we do a lot of careers fairs, and when we first started doing them, it was you go up after the IT boys and you think, oh God, I'm going to make us sexy. And we had a moment where we just turned up, and we had Microsoft up there, we had Amazon up there, we had Google up there, and you just think, okay. So we just got up there and said, without us, they don't work. Changed the whole complexion of the discussion. And coming back to Steve's point, that's what it's about. Without us, it doesn't work.
Okay, I mean, we had a brilliant discussion. Just before we get in, before we finish, might be a red herring, but the US election, obviously we talked a bit about Brexit, but are you seeing does that have any aspect on, US versus UK, Europe data center industry? Do you have any handle on whether, as I say, President-elect, as we must call him, Mr. Biden will be good or bad for our data center industry, depending on what happens in the States, or is that a non-starter at this moment in time?
Well, I think there's a couple of things potentially that are interesting. That I think his approach to energy and sustainability will potentially be different, and may take a more global role in that, which I think would be helpful for the data center industry and technology. We've seen, irrespective of who the president's been, a enormous investment from US companies, data center companies, into Europe and to Asia over the last few years, because, as we said, it's a global business. But I can see, just some areas where just, from an engine sustainability, potentially better relations in part of the world, may not have a direct impact on the data center industry, but may have a better impact on the wider macro economic environment in terms of relationships, which may just make the path easier for all of us as we go into different parts of the world to execute our work.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.